Return to a world without us. Just turn back time not 1,000,000 years, not even 500,000, just 300,000 years, and already you find yourself on a world you would barely recognize. No cities, no languages, no steel, no maps, no nations, no electricity humming overhead, no satellites blinking from above, just wind, ice, rock and silence. A world unmarked by humanity, a world that never needed us, a planet still ruled by nature in its rawest form. This was Earth, but not the Earth of skyscrapers and carbon footprints. This was the Earth before dominion, before the spark of empire, before we carved borders into it and called it ours. It was a wild Earth. Mountains rose sharper. Volcanoes rumbled louder. The air itself felt heavier, wetter, colder, hotter, depending on where you stood. Where London now lies, a blanket of glaciers crushed the land into silence. Where the Sahara now burns, grasslands had only just begun to vanish. The Siberian plains stretched into frozen seas, their edges haunted by giant woolly mammoths, steppe bison, ancient rhinoceroses, and saber-toothed cats that drifted through the mist like ghosts. Everywhere you looked, something older was watching. And into this kingdom of ice and fire, of tusks and fangs, something strange had just stepped out of the shadows. Us. Or rather the earliest version of us, Homo sapiens. The name sounds strong now, but then it meant nothing. We had no claws, no thick fur to shield us from the cold, no wings, no armour, no venom. We were small, soft, vulnerable, armed with nothing but bare hands, an upright spine, and a strange growing brain. We weren't hunters yet, not really. We were the hunted. Back then, we lived close to the ground. We moved at dusk. We huddled together at night, not for warmth, but for survival. Look around, we were few. One tribe here, one there, barely a few thousand scattered across a continent. We didn't own the earth, we borrowed it. And all around us nature didn't care that we walked on 2 feet. A lion wouldn't pause to appreciate our upright posture. A bear wouldn't wait for us to invent language. A thunderstorm wouldn't soften just because we feared it. This was a world that tested everything. The weak were eaten, the slow were left behind. The unlucky became part of the food chain. And yet we endured. Why? We didn't fight harder. We weren't faster or stronger than the beasts around us. But we watched. We remembered. We whispered stories in the dark and passed them on to those who followed. In the caves of North Africa we learned to paint. Not to decorate, but to remember. The shape of a predator, the tracks of prey, the image of a creature so large it shook the earth when it walked. In the valleys of Asia we learned to sharpen rock into tools, not to conquer but to defend, from things with fangs longer than our fingers, from eyes that glowed at night, from the cold that cracked skin and bone. In the forests of Europe we learned to hide, not out of cowardice but from a deep primal awareness that we did not belong on top. And yet, bit by bit, we survived. It wasn't a victory. It was a gamble, a narrow, breathless escape from extinction again and again and again. For every fire we lit, a storm blew it out. For every tool we shaped, a predator circled closer. For every child we birthed, the earth demanded a price. And still we continued. We watched the mammoths pass and we followed. We studied the rivers and we drank where they pooled. We feared the great cats and we traced their patterns through the underbrush. We didn't fight for control of the earth. We fought for one more day and then one more after that. And slowly, across thousands of generations, something started to change. We began to name the things around us, not aloud, not yet, but in our minds. Fire became more than flame. It became warmth. It became power. The hunt became more than food. It became ritual. It became legend. The stars became more than dots in the sky. They became stories maps for those brave enough to walk night. And with each passing century, the wild grew quieter. Not because the earth grew tame, but because we grew clever. And cleverness real, dangerous cleverness was something the world had never seen before. The saber-toothed cat still prowled, the giant bird still walked, the mammoth still trumpeted across the snow. But a new kind of creature had arrived, not one made of muscle, bone, or fang, but one made of memory and fire. And the world slowly, reluctantly began to bend. But before all that, before civilization, before cities, before war and song and steel, there was just this moment. The earth, untamed, the beasts, unchallenged, and us tiny, quiet, half-afraid standing at the edge of something enormous. We weren't kings, we weren't special, we weren't even sure if we'd survive the winter, but we did, and that changed everything. Because if you want to truly understand who we are, you must first meet the ones who came before us. Not the humans, not the tribes, but the giants who ruled this earth while we still trembled in their shadow. They were faster, stronger, stranger, older. They were not myths, they were real, and they left behind bones, prints, and stories written in stone. History tried to erase them, but we remember. And now, so will you. Pelorovis, the horned colossus of Africa, before the cow, before the ox, before ploughs dragged through fields and bells rang through meadows, there was Pelorovis. Not a farm animal, not a gentle grazer, but a colossus of the ancient savannah, a shadow that moved like a storm across the African plains. You wouldn't recognize it at first. Your mind would search for familiar shapes, a bull maybe, a bison, but nothing quite fits. Because Pelorovis was not just a bigger version of something we know, it was a relic from a time when nature still dreamed in extremes. 2 meters tall at the shoulder, weighing nearly 1,600 kilograms, its horns thick as tree trunks could stretch up to 2 meters long, each one curving outward and upward, like the crescent blades of a forgotten god. It didn't charge. It didn't need to. Even lions kings of today's savannas thought twice. Even hyenas kept their distance, circling at the edge of the wind, because when Pelorovis walked, it didn't just move, it declared. You wouldn't have heard it roar, but you would have felt it coming, a low vibration in the earth, a tremor beneath your bare feet, the kind of feeling that stops a human heart before the eyes even register danger. And for early humans, those first Homo sapiens still learning to survive Pelorovis, wasn't just a beast, it was a revelation. The first paintings ever drawn in Africa deep inside stone shelters and cliff faces do not show villages, they do not show gods. They show Pelorovis, scrawled in ochre and charcoal, red earth, black dust, massive horns sketched in long looping lines, muscular backs arched, heads low as if charging from the rock itself. These weren't hunting guides. No spear would have brought this beast down. These were acts of memory, of awe, or maybe of fear, because to stand in the shadow of Pelorovis was to remember your place, and that place was beneath. The African savanna back then was no quiet grassland. It was a battleground of titans, gigantic elephants, towering giraffids, and Pelorovis holding its ground like a four-legged fortress. It didn't gallop, it didn't stalk, it stood, and standing was enough. Those horns weren't decoration, they were weapons, not made for sparring like modern bulls, not just for display, but for gouging, for throwing predators off their feet, for sweeping aside threats like dry grass. You didn't want to get too close, not even to the bones, because even the fossils of Pelorovis feel like relics, massive skulls buried deep in East African rock, horns still intact, still curled like question marks in stone, the kind of bones that look built not grown, as if some ancient hand forged them in secret and left them behind. And yet, Pleurovis wasn't just a brute. It was a survivor. It endured droughts that cracked the earth, fires that swallowed whole valleys, predators that hunted in packs and tore flesh from bone. But Pleurovis stood its ground until one day it didn't. No one knows exactly how it ended. There was no explosion, no plague, no great beast that took its place. But sometime around 10,000 years ago, the tracks simply stopped. The horns vanished from cave walls. The bones grew rarer, scattered thinly across ancient lake beds. Some say the climate changed, grasslands dried, water became scarce. Others say the problem wasn't drought, it was us, because by then humans had changed. We had fire, we had strategy, we had stone-tipped weapons and tactics that hadn't existed before. We weren't just watching anymore, we were planning, coordinating, hunting in teams, and no matter how massive you are, no matter how sharp your horns or strong your shoulders, you can't outmatch 100 minds working as one. We don't know if humans hunted Pleurovis to extinction, but we do know this. The moment we stopped fearing it was the moment it started to disappear. What once was sacred became possible, then practical, then meat. That's how it always goes. The gods of the wild don't fall in battle, they fade into usefulness, and then they vanish. But something of Pleurovis remained, not in the bones, not in the dust, but in us, in every tale of the monstrous bull, in every myth of horned gods and beasts that guard the underworld, in every stone carving, every ancestral dream, where power is drawn in curves. The legacy of Pleurovis lives in our memory of fear, of respect, of looking up and realizing that we were not the biggest, not the strongest, not the loudest. We were simply watching. And we remembered, and that memory, it still lingers. In the eyes of modern cattle sometimes, there's a flicker, a shadow of something older, wilder, a twitch of the horn, a stomp of the hoof, an echo of a creature that once walked like thunder across the earth. So the next time you see a bull in a pasture, docile, fenced, chewing in peace, remember that it comes from something ancient, something unbroken, something immense, Pleurovis, the horned colossus, the beast that made early humans look up and bow, Macrauchenia, the creature evolution forgot, before llamas, before horses galloped across the grasslands of South America, before the continent even knew what it meant to be hunted by man, there was Macrauchenia, not a horse, not a camel, not an elephant, not anything you've seen before, or ever will again. Macrauchenia was nature's odd draft, the kind of animal that makes even paleontologists double-check the bones, a camel's body, a giraffe's neck and an elephant's nose, as if the earth stitched together leftovers from other beasts and gave it legs. But this was no joke. It wasn't a mistake. It was a masterpiece of survival built not for beauty but for endurance, adapted not to one world but to millions of years of isolation. Because once, long ago, South America was a floating world, a continent adrift, separated from the rest of the animal kingdoms. No lions, no wolves, no elephants, only its own experiments. Macrauchenia was one of them. It belonged to a strange family, the Litopterns, a now extinct group of hoofed mammals that evolved in solitude. No ancestors in Africa, no cousins in Asia, only echoes of extinct lineages buried beneath Andes dust and pampas stone. It walked on 3 toes, long and slender. Its neck rose like a periscope above the tall grass, scanning for movement, and its nose a soft, muscular trunk curled from the centre of its face, part snorkel, part heat regulator, part mystery. It was quiet, gentle, herbivorous. It fed on shrubs, soft grasses and low branches, not because it lacked options, but because it didn't need more. No claws, no fangs, no aggression. Macrauchenia lived in a world that hadn't yet invented fear. But time moves, and nothing stays untouched forever. Because across oceans and glaciers, in a land Macrauchenia would never dream of, something was coming. Homo sapiens. But long before they arrived, for millions of years Macrauchenia roamed unchallenged. Its body adapted to the high plateaus of the Andes, its lungs capable of drawing in thin air. It survived droughts, volcanic winters, and predators that hunted with instinct, not strategy. It survived creatures like terror birds, fast, flightless killers with beaks like axes. It survived the giant short-faced bears, apex hunters with jaws that could crush bone. It survived jaguars, saber-toothed cats, and slinking prehistoric crocodiles. But Macrauchenia endured, not by running the fastest, not by hiding the deepest, but by existing in balance with a land untouched by man. And then, one day, everything changed. The first humans arrived on the shores of South America. They didn't come in hordes. They came in small groups with children on their backs and spears in their hands. They didn't roar or stamp or fly, but they remembered. They watched. They learned. And for the first time in Macrauchenia's long and peaceful history, a new kind of predator had appeared. One that didn't stalk alone. One that used fire and traps and thought ahead. One that looked soft but could kill from a distance. Macrauchenia had never known anything like it. It had survived tooth and claw. But strategy, that was new. We don't know exactly when it happened. There's no fossil that marks the final breath. No cave drawing of a final hunt. But sometime around 12,000 years ago, the last Macrauchenia vanished. Not in an explosion, not in a flood, but in silence. Perhaps it wandered too close to a new kind of scent, smoke. Perhaps it fled, confused, from torches in the dark. Perhaps it looked into the eyes of a creature smaller, weaker, slower, and failed to see what was coming. Extinction doesn't always scream. Sometimes it forgets to run. Even its bones confused us. For more than a century, scientists argued over what Macrauchenia even was: a camel, a llama, a deformed horse. Its skeleton said one thing, its skull said another. Its limbs, they told a story no one had heard before. It wasn't until 2017 that its secret was finally unlocked. From a fragment of fossilized bone in the windswept wilderness of Patagonia, scientists extracted ancient DNA and discovered its closest modern relatives weren't camels or elephants, but horses. Yet calling Macrauchenia a horse would be like calling a thunderstorm a drizzle. It was more, older, wiser in a way only time can grant. It was the last whisper of a branch of lifer lineage lost to isolation, and when it died, a continent lost more than just a beast. It lost a memory. Today, there are no Macrauchenia statues, no temples, no fairy tales written in its name. But its story is etched in the rock. Its bones lie in the dust of caves, in the shadow of condor wings, and in the bones, truth. That life once imagined creatures more wondrous than we can ever create. That evolution dreams weirder than fiction, and that silence does not mean weakness. Macrauchenia didn't roar. It didn't fight. It didn't need to. It thrived in a world of balance, and when that balance broke, it vanished quietly, without a final scream, without a war, just one more name scratched from the ledger of existence. We came, we watched, and we remembered. And now, so will you. So the next time you look out across a plain, or see a llama grazing lazily in a field, remember that once, long ago, this land belonged to something stranger, quieter, older. Macrauchenia, the creature evolution forgot, but the earth never did. Nothrotheriops, the creature evolution forgot, but the earth never did. Nothrotheriops, the sloth of stone and sand. When you hear the word sloth, your mind drifts toward the treetops. A sleepy creature, clinging lazily to a branch. A slow blink, a gentle yawn. An animal that seems more dream than predator or prey. But long before the forest grew quiet, before sloth became a symbol of stillness, there was Nothrotheriops. Not a climber, not a sleeper, not a tree hanger at all. This sloth walked, and it walked the deserts. Stone, not leaves. Cactus, not fruit. Sun, not shade. Nothrotheriops didn't live in the treetops. It walked across the desert floor over brittle stone and jagged roots, beneath skies that forgot how to rain. It stood over 2 meters tall, weighed nearly a ton, and moved with the slow grace of something that had never needed to rush. This was not a creature of fear. It didn't flee. It didn't fight. It simply was. A desert survivalist born of another world. One of tough hides, tough teeth, and tougher resolve. And what did it eat? Not sweet leaves or berries, not forest figs or flowering vines. It ate cactus spines and all, yucca, agave, desert scrub, even things sharp enough to slice a careless hand. But Nothrotheriops wasn't careless. It was ancient, and ancient creatures don't flinch. They adapt. Its stomach a chamber of miracles, a biological furnace that could break down fibers modern animals can't even touch. Its mouth lined with teeth built not for chewing but for grinding, for crushing through dryness, for surviving where few dared to feed. And we don't guess this. We know because Nothrotheriops left us something sacred, something rare, something almost never preserved. It left us its dung. Inside Rampart Cave, hidden in the Grand Canyon's vast stone silence, scientists found fossilized droppings, coprolites packed with slivers of desert life. Sun-dried cactus, agave threads, yucca fibers twisted like ancient string. They tell the story of a creature that understood the land far better than we ever could. Because to survive in the desert isn't just endurance, it's memory. Memory of where the rain once fell, of which plants grow back, of how to keep walking even when the sun won't blink. And Nothrotheriops walked through ages. Long before humans came to North America, this sloth had already mastered the stone. It lived in the shadow of extinct horses, mammoths, dire wolves. It watched saber-toothed cats trace the edge of its world. It heard the thunder of bison herds before they became myth. But the world kept changing. And then came us, Homo sapiens, not loud, not strong, but steady. We arrived in small waves, carrying sharpened tools, carrying stories, carrying strategy. And suddenly the quiet desert wasn't so quiet. We saw Nothrotheriops. We watched it. We understood its slowness not as peace but as opportunity. We didn't need to chase it. We only had to wait. A trap here, a spear there, a group of hands working in concert. And slowly, steadily, the giant sloth disappeared. Not in one day, not with a bang, but over centuries its tracks grew shallower. Its dung piles ceased. Its bones stopped turning up fresh. Some remains date to just 11,000 years ago. That means that when the first human stories were being carved into North American stone, when the ancestors of the Navajo and Hopi were only just beginning to dream under desert skies, Nothrotheriops still walked among them. It might have seen fire. It might have watched us from cliff shadows. It might have stared with unblinking eyes as the world it had known for millennia changed. But it didn't fight. It didn't adapt fast enough. It didn't understand what had come. Because extinction doesn't always arrive as a predator. Sometimes it comes dressed as progress. And this creature, this desert guardian, faded. Its last moments were not drawn on cave walls. Its image wasn't carved into idols. It vanished quietly. Its legacy wasn't roar or thunder. It was in the silence of the canyon, the memory of a creature that never needed to conquer, only to endure. And yet Nothrotheriops left us more than bones, more than dung, more than a name in the fossil record. It left us a lesson. That strength is not always loud, that survival can be soft-footed, that even in a world of saber teeth and ice and hunger, there was room for the gentle in the quietest corners of the desert, where cactus blooms open to the moonlight. Perhaps something still remembers. A shadow, a soundless step, a whisper of a sloth made of sand and stone. So the next time you stand in the desert squinting at the heat, feeling the wind scratch your face, remember, this land once belonged to a creature that walked slower than time, ate weapons for breakfast, and lived not for glory but for peace. Nothrotheriops, the sloth of stone and sand, gone not because it was weak, gone because it was slow in a world that had just discovered speed, and yet it walked longer than any empire, longer than any city, longer than us so far. Civatherium, the divine deer of India. Before the temples, before the scriptures, before the gods had names, there was Civatherium, not a deer, not a moose, not a giraffe, but something older, grander, something that doesn't fit into a neat shape. Imagine a creature so strange, so powerful, that it seems sculpted by a god not born of the earth. It stood over 3 meters tall, weighed more than a ton, its neck rose like a cathedral pillar, its body wide as a royal warhorse. But it wasn't the size that made Civatherium holy. It was the horns. Not one pair but 2, one set short and crowned rising from the brow like twin spires, another sweeping back thick and curled, a crown forged in bone, part giraffe, part moose, part myth. This wasn't a creature that charged into battle. It didn't need to. Civatherium commanded the world by presence alone. In the dry forests and grassy hills of ancient India, in the scrublands of North Africa, across a kingdom that stretched from Morocco to the Himalayas, Civatherium walked like it belonged to the sky, and humans noticed. Before we farmed, before we prayed. We looked up from the soil and saw it, this majestic beast moving with silent authority across the plains. And we did what humans always do when faced with awe. We tried to understand it by worshipping it, because Civatherium didn't run. It didn't flee like antelope. It didn't snarl like cats. It stood, watched, moved with dignity. And so we carved it into stone onto temple walls, into the memory of legends that outlasted its breath. In time, it became something more than animal. It became symbol, avatar, divine relic. The people of the Indian subcontinent whispered of a beast sacred to Shiva, the god of destruction and creation of wild forests and cosmic balance, and the beast, Civatherium. Not named by scientists, but remembered by mythmakers, the antlered god of the wilderness. It lived in the edges of things, where forest met grass, where silence met wind, where time moved just a little slower. It fed on branches, on dry leaves, on the tough grasses others ignored. Its tongue, nimble, its neck, powerful, its presence unforgettable. But reverence does not mean protection, and memory is not always mercy. Because even the sacred fall, and Civatherium fell quietly. There are no dramatic kill sites, no mass graves, no fossils frozen mid-battle. There is only the absence, a few bones, a scattering of remains, a footprint here, a horn fragment there, and silence. Its last known traces date to around 8,000 years ago, which means that as the first villages were rising, as humans were planting wheat and raising goats, as languages began forming, Civatherium still walked the land. And then it didn't. Maybe it couldn't compete with the new grazing herds. Maybe it was hunted, not for meat but for glory. Maybe simply the forests shrank, the grasslands changed, and the gods had no room left to roam. 'Cause humans don't always kill with teeth. Sometimes we erase with progress, and no creature, not even a sacred one, can survive that forever. Yet, Civatherium remains, not in body, but in art. Its likeness carved onto ancient coins, its horns immortalized in temple sculpture, its shape lingering in the minds of shepherds and poets. The Hindus called it the beast of Shiva, others, the giant elk of the hills. Some even confused it with distant giraffes or imagined hybrids. Because when a creature vanishes just slowly enough, it doesn't die in the mind. It becomes myth, and myth is harder to kill. Even in death, Civatherium stood taller than the men who remembered it. Its bones whisper not of blood but of reverence, of fires lit in its honour, of dreams shaped by its walk. This was no mere herbivore. This was a memory given legs, a time capsule, a symbol, a question carved in horn. What happens when the sacred vanishes? What happens when the wild god of the grasslands, the four-horned king, the silent sentinel, goes still? We forget. And then we find its bones, and we remember again. Today there are none left. No herds, no echoes on the plains, just fossils buried under dust and temple stories retold beneath banyan trees. But if you truly listen, you might hear a whisper through the dry wind, a step heavier than deer, a breath slower than ox, a gaze that made even warriors pause. That was Civatherium. Not a god, not a myth, but something between the two. A creature so majestic it blurred the line between the sacred and the real. So the next time you see a deer lift its head in the dawn light, or a pair of horns rising above the brush, don't look away. You're seeing a reflection, a glimmer, a last echo of something we once feared, honoured, painted, and then lost. Civatherium, the divine deer of India, gone from the world, alive in our memory. Because even the gods of bone leave footprints. Gigantopithecus, the silent forest monk. It didn't roar, it didn't chase, it didn't kill, and yet Gigantopithecus haunted the imagination of all who came after. Not because of its savagery, but because of its silence. 10 feet tall, over half a ton of pure hulking mass. An ape so large it could have snapped trees like twigs, and yet it never did. No claws, no fangs, no hunger for meat. Just leaves, roots, bamboo, and stillness. This was not a beast of war. It was a forest monk, a gentle giant who lived in the shadows of Southeast Asia's rainforests, wandering beneath the canopies like a living echo of something older than fear. We call it Gigantopithecus, but once it had no name, because no human ever recorded it. There are no cave paintings, no bone tools, no spears lodged in its bones, only silence. It lived before memory, and when it vanished it left behind not myth but questions. We've never found a full skeleton, just fragments, teeth as thick as thumb bones, jawbones heavy enough to anchor ships, pieces of a puzzle too large for our minds to finish. But from those fragments we glimpse a shape, a shadow that once moved like a silent guardian through the forests of China, Vietnam, and India. A shadow that stood taller than a basketball hoop, one that could reach into the tallest trees and pull down fruit with delicate fingers, one that could vanish behind a wall of bamboo like smoke behind glass. Gigantopithecus was an herbivore. Its diet was simple bamboo mostly, like the pandas it once lived beside. It ate in peace, moved in peace, lived in peace. And yet we fear it. Because nothing terrifies us more than something massive and quiet. A creature that could crush you but doesn't. A presence so large that it seems mythical and yet so gentle, it leaves no scars behind. It didn't need power. It didn't display dominance. It didn't pound its chest or howl at the sky. It just was. A monk carved from muscle and patience. But the world doesn't always reward gentleness, and even giants must bow to time. The climate began to shift. The forests began to die, and as the green world shrank, Gigantopithecus had nowhere left to go. It didn't adapt fast enough. It couldn't transition from the high canopy to the hard soil of human-cleared land. And then came Homo erectus, smaller, sharper, firelit and hungry. We didn't battle Gigantopithecus. There are no signs of war, no evidence of direct violence, because there was no need. We didn't kill it. We outlived it. We brought fire. We brought dogs. We brought deforestation. And for a creature that needed silence, shade, and time, that was enough. So it stepped back. No battle cry, no death scene. Just a final, quiet departure into extinction. No one mourned. No one noticed. A forest grew a little quieter. A fruit tree ripened unplucked. And one day the monk simply did not return. That was over 300,000 years ago. But the fear remained. In the cracks between cultures, in the stories whispered across mountains. They called it Yeti Bigfoot, the forest shadow. They imagined it as a monster, because they couldn't accept a giant that didn't harm. Because in our world, we measure danger by size, and when we see something bigger than us, we assume it must be our enemy. But Gigantopithecus never was. It did not conquer. It did not compete. It endured. For millions of years it was a symbol of restraint. It shared the land with smaller apes, with slow herbivores, with rising hominins, and it did so with a wisdom our species would take eons to understand. That to live well, sometimes you must live quietly, and now we search for it in myths, in blurry photographs, in shaky videos of forest trails. But we won't find it. Not because it didn't exist, but because we no longer know how to look. We look for beasts, for threats, for screams. But Gigantopithecus left no such signs, only teeth buried in cave soil, only silence where a legend once breathed. We call it extinct, but maybe that word isn't quite right. Because when you walk into a deep rainforest and hear nothing but the hum of insects, the whisper of leaves, that silence is still shaped by something, still haunted. Maybe not by fear, but by awe. Gigantopithecus was the last of the great apes who never wanted to rule the last giant who bowed to the forest, instead of breaking it. And when the forest fell, so did the monk. Today we build cities. We lay down roads, we plant flags, and somewhere in that forward march we forget how to walk softly. But if you ever stand beneath a tall tree where the air is thick and cool and a shadow passes above, let your heart pause. It may just be the echo of something lost, something huge, something harmless, something holy. Gigantopithecus, the silent monk of the forest, the ape who never roared but taught us in vanishing what true strength looks like. Titan, the bird that walked like a god. It did not fly, it did not hunt, it did not roar, and yet when it stepped onto the plains the ground remembered. Titan, the largest bird to ever walk the earth, over 3 meters tall, nearly 1,000 kilograms of pure muscle and bone, carved into a frame that looked less like an animal and more like a monument. Its name means big bird in Malagasy, but that's like calling Everest a hill. Virumbi didn't simply walk, it strode. Through wind-bent grasslands, through baobab shadows, through the untouched Eden of ancient Madagascar. No wings, no claws, no weapons. It had legs like temple columns, feet built to carry history itself, and a presence that made even predators pause. It didn't need armor. It didn't need venom. It didn't need violence. Because nothing challenged it. Not even the leopards. Not even the crocodiles. Nothing else was big enough to try. Virumbi was more than massive, it was mythic. Its small head sat atop a thick, powerful neck, like a crown worn low. Its beak, broad and blunt, not for tearing flesh, but for cracking the world open. Fruits, nuts, hard seeds. The diet of a peaceful giant Virumbi thrived not by domination, but by balance. It shaped the forest by feeding, spreading seeds with each slow step, tilling the soil with its feet. It was the silent gardener of an untouched paradise. For millions of years it knew no fear. The island was its kingdom, an ecosystem sculpted in its rhythm. It laid eggs the size of boulders nearly 1 meter long, each one large enough to feed a human family for days if they dared. But for a long time, there were no humans in Madagascar, just lemurs, crocodiles, strange pigs, tiny hippos, and the god bird walking slow and eternal, as if time moved for it alone. And then we came, Homo sapiens, tired, hungry, far-travelled by boat, bringing more than tools, bringing fire, no claws, no size, but we brought something Vorumbi had never seen: strategy. We saw it not as a miracle, not as a guardian, but as a meal slow, heavy, unarmoured. We didn't fight it, we harvested it. Its eggs were taken first, an entire generation, gone before it hatched. Then came the traps, then came the fires. We burned the forests, cleared the grasslands, forced the giant into open spaces where it could no longer hide. Vorumbi didn't resist. It didn't understand. Because it had never needed to run. For millions of years nothing had chased it. But now something did, and not for sport, not even for survival, for dominion. Within a few short centuries it was gone. No mass extinction event, no asteroid, no volcanic cataclysm. Just people and the hunger that never sleeps. We don't know exactly when the last Vorumbi walked its last steps. Maybe it happened under a full moon. Maybe it fell in silence, surrounded by torches. Or maybe it simply sat down, refused to run, and faded like a memory the island could no longer hold. And then there were none. Today only bones remain, scattered across dry soil. Huge, dense, weighty things that refuse to decay. Time cannot forget them, no matter how hard it tries. In museums we reconstruct it piece by piece, but we can never rebuild the presence. You can measure the femur, you can cast the skull, but you'll never recreate what it felt like to see it walk by. You'd feel it before you saw it, a rhythmic tremor beneath the feet, like the beat of some prehistoric drum. Then it would appear. Not fast, not loud, just inevitable. A titan made of feather and silence. A god that never needed prayers. But for the people who first saw it, it must have felt like a miracle with legs, a deity you could touch, a myth that ate leaves and cast shadows wider than huts. Did they fear it? Or did they kneel? Or did they just get hungry? Madagascar remembers, in its stories, in its folk songs, in the dust where the forests once stood. They speak of a bird that walked without fear, that could crack trees underfoot, that vanished when the humans brought fire. Some call it the elephant bird, some the forgotten titan. Others just whisper, because some creatures are too large to believe and too quiet to remember properly. But Vorumbi was real. It walked. It watched. And when the world changed, it didn't. That was its undoing. In a time when survival belonged to the cunning, to the fire makers, to the ones who reshaped Earth, the gentle were the first to fall. Vorumbi never learned to fear, and in our world that's a fatal mistake. So when you look at an ostrich, a cassowary, even a chicken, understand this. Each one is a whisper, a fading echo, a fragile ember of a bird that once walked like a god and fell to a species that forgot how to bow. Vorumbi titan, the bird that didn't fly, because it didn't need to, the bird that didn't run, because for eons it never had to, and the bird that, in the face of fire, did not scream. It simply disappeared. Homotherium, the saber-toothed strategist. Not all cats stalk alone, not all predators fight with brute strength, and not all extinction stories are victories. This is the story of Homotherium, a saber-tooth, yes, but not the one you're thinking of. Not Smilodon, the solitary reaper of the Americas with its massive fangs and thunderous pounce. Homotherium was something else. Not a monster, not a loner, but a tactician. It didn't hunt from shadows. It didn't wait for weakness. It worked with others. This saber-toothed cat was a coordinator, an apex mind inside a killing machine. He had shorter canines, still long but thick, designed not to stab but to slice. Not a spear, a scalpel. Homotherium didn't need to roar, it let its strategy do the speaking. Across the continents, from Africa to Eurasia, even into North America, Homotherium ranged wider than any predator of its kind. It wasn't a local terror, it was a global force, a feline that spread across empires of prehistory, roaming the same lands where ancient elephants marched, where giant deer grazed, and where early humans began to dream of fire and tools. It stood taller than a lion sleeker, with longer limbs built for chasing, not ambushing. It didn't rely on stealth alone, it relied on teamwork. Homotherium hunted in packs like wolves, but faster, like lions, but smarter. Imagine this, a dozen cats moving in formation circling a mammoth calf, not with noise but with patience. They didn't strike all at once, they closed in, cut angles, watched the wind, and when the moment came they struck with precision, not chaos. This wasn't a battle, it was surgery. And it worked for a while. Because for millions of years Homotherium thrived. It competed with hyenas, with lions, with leopards. It walked beside giants and it wasn't afraid. In the ice-rimmed valleys of Europe, in the sun-baked steppes of Africa, and on the ancient plains of Texas and Alaska, Homotherium was king, and then it met us. Homo erectus, the toolmaker, the firebringer, the upright predator with no claws, no fangs, but strategy that could rival even a saber-tooth. It was never supposed to be a fair fight, but it was. Because Homotherium wasn't just dangerous, it was organized. It could read prey, track migrations, learn from mistakes. There's evidence in bone. In a cave in Europe, a stone axe head lies beside the tooth of a Homotherium, not Fairchild's tooth. Nearby, scratches on the wall, not from claws, from flint. A story, written without words, the clash of species, firelight, stone, fang, a standoff where neither side backed down. We don't know how often it happened, but we know it happened, humans versus Homotherium, both intelligent, both organized, both hunting in groups. One with brains, one with blades, and only one would walk away. Not always, not at first. Early humans likely lost many encounters. A pack of Homotherium could tear through a small band of hunters. One swipe from a paw, one slice from that jaw, and the firelit camp became a scene of carnage. But over time the tide shifted, because we didn't stop. We watched. We adapted. We crafted better weapons, learned to defend the weak, to fight in darkness, to bait and trap. We used the one thing no cat could match, memory, and slowly Homotherium began to disappear. Not from the world, but from our territory. One region at a time, we pushed it back. The open plains became farms, the forests became homes, the water holes became sacred, and where the saber-tooth once drank we stood. Homotherium held on as long as it could. Fossils show it survived into the late Pleistocene long after the mammoths were fading, long after the megafauna began to die off. It clung to the edges of the map, northern tundras, southern ridges, remote wilderness. But nowhere was truly safe. We followed, we always follow. And then silence. No dramatic extinction event, no final skeleton pierced by a spear, just the absence. The echo of footfalls that no longer came, the fading memory of the pack with fangs. And what do we have left? Jawbones, teeth, claw marks in caves, scars on bones of prey animals cut with terrifying accuracy. We have whispers of a time when the greatest predator wasn't a monster, but a master tactician. Some call it the scimitar cat, because of the curve of its teeth. Others call it the pack hunter of prehistory, but what it really was a rival to us. The only predator that fought us with strategy, that could predict our moves, that perhaps feared not our strength, but our growth. Because in the end, we didn't win with muscle. We won with numbers, with fire, with memory. And when Homotherium vanished, it didn't vanish in disgrace. It vanished in silence, knowing perhaps that its time was over, that the age of fangs was ending, and the age of ideas had begun. But we remember. In museums, its jaws hang open, frozen mid-bite. In books, it's overshadowed by Smilodon. In games and films, it's often forgotten. But not here. Here we remember Homotherium not as a brute, but as a General A warrior, a shadow among shadows, the feline that looked at us not with fear, but with recognition. We were alike, and only one of us could stay. Homotherium. The saber-toothed that didn't just hunt, it planned. It adapted. It almost matched us, and for that reason alone we should not forget it. Metridius virus, the warthog with blade tusks. Do not let the word pig fool you. This was no squealing barnyard animal, no mud-rolling cartoon, no petting zoo escapee. This was Metridius, the warthog of the prehistoric inferno, a creature sculpted by fire, drought and violence, a beast whose very bones were carved into warnings, and it wore its weapons on its face. 4 tusks, not 2, 4. The lower pair, razor-sharp, curving up like hunting knives. The upper pair, massive, curling like the scimitars of ancient kings, each one a polished crescent of ivory death, sharpened by the very act of living. Every bite, every charge, every moment of survival filed those tusks down into cutting edges. They weren't for show. They were tools. They were armor. They were the last thing some predators ever saw. Metridius didn't need to be big. It wasn't a giant. It wasn't elegant. It was a tank with a temper, standing just over a meter tall, weighing close to 250 kilograms. It was low to the ground, thick with muscle, and utterly unafraid. Across the grasslands and bone-dry scrublands of prehistoric Africa, it roamed like a short 4-legged battering ram head down, eyes alert, legs like pistons. It didn't stalk prey, it survived. And in a land where everything hunted, that was the deadliest talent of all. You didn't corner it. You didn't chase it. You let it pass. Because when Metridius charged, bones snapped. Not just its enemies, sometimes its own, because survival didn't care about comfort. It only cared about who walked away. It could eat anything, tough grasses, dry bark, rotting meat, whatever the sun hadn't yet turned to ash. And when the rains failed, it dug, not with shovels, not with tools, with sheer force, tearing through earth, clawing through roots, searching for tubers, buried water, forgotten scraps of life. Its skull was thick, not just to protect its brain, but to weaponize it. This was a creature that turned its head into a hammer and its tusks into blades. It wasn't a predator. It didn't need to be. But if something came too close, lion, leopard, even early humans, it didn't flee. It fought. Imagine a hunter from Homo erectus, stone spear in hand, tracking a trail through the acacia trees. He sees the warthog. Small, broad, covered in dust. He readies his weapon, moves in slowly, and then it turns, and the world explodes. The warthog charges. No roar, no warning, just impact. A blur of tusks and hooves, dust and bone. The spear shatters, the hunter falls, and if he survives, he never forgets. Because this wasn't just a close call, it was a lesson. Even prey can be lethal. That's why in the dirt beds of Olduvai Gorge, where the bones of Homo erectus sleep beside those of ancient beasts, you find fossils of Metridius too. Right next to stone tools, right next to the cut marks, right next to the stories that were never written, only lived. We hunted them, yes, but carefully. They were meat. They were danger. They were proof that survival was not for the brave, but for the prepared. And when one was finally brought down, you didn't celebrate. You checked your wounds, you counted your losses, you bled. Because the warthog never went quietly. Its name means between the tusks pig. But that name is a lie. It wasn't between the tusks that you should look, it was the tusks themselves. That's where the story lived. That's where death waited. Over time, the climate changed. The rivers dried, new predators came, humans grew more cunning. Metridiocurus did not. It had survived for millions of years from the Pliocene through the Pleistocene, weathering droughts and floods, lions and leopards, even early versions of us. But eventually the rules changed. Homo sapiens arrived with more than fire, they brought cooperation planning. Traps. And for the first time, the warthog's charge met not a lion's claw, not a careless hunter's gut, but a circle of spears fire behind it. Sharp stone ahead. No escape, no advantage. Only a death it couldn't outrun. Not because it was weak, but because it was built for the old world and the new world was run by those who rewrote the rules. Today, it's gone. Its closest cousins still live modern warthogs, bush pigs, boars. They carry echoes in their tusks, hints in their eyes. But none of them carry the weight, the power, the rage Metridiocurus. It was the pig that looked like a demon and fought like a god. It left behind no legends, no cave paintings, no temples, only bones and a question. What else did we fear and then forget? What monsters did we conquer? Not with might, but with memory. Metridiocurus was never a king. It didn't rule with majesty. It wasn't divine. It was something rarer. It was real. And in the heart of the African plains, when the heat shimmered on the horizon and predators stalked the grass, Metridiocurus stood its ground, a tusked battering ram, a symbol of the old chaos, a beast that reminded every hunter, you're not alone, and sometimes the hunted can kill. Megafauna, the turtle with a war club. It didn't move fast, it didn't strike first, it didn't roar, chase, or flee. But it was not weak. This is the story of Megafauna, a creature that should have been a myth, yet once walked under the sun on distant islands, a turtle not of pond or sea, but of land, with a tail like a mace, a skull like a helmet, and a body like a fortress. It was not bred for speed, it was not shaped for elegance, it was built for endurance. Picture a turtle over 2.5 meters long, weighing nearly half a ton. Not a soft-shelled slowpoke, but an armoured juggernaut, a living tank that moved with the silence of stone and the weight of memory. Megafauna was no gentle shell-hugger basking in streams. It was an islander, a wanderer of ancient Australasia found on islands like Lord Howe, Vanuatu, and New Caledonia. Where volcanoes slept and storms whispered, Megafauna walked among the ferns and palms, its heavy footsteps beating softly against the leaf-strewn soil. Its horned head was its first warning. 2 bony protrusions curled backward from its skull like broken ram's horns, forming a crown not for ruling but for warning. Its eyes were protected beneath a bony ridge, its skull thick and blunt, as if carved to absorb blows that never came. Because on those remote islands nothing dared challenge it. Its tail was not like a turtle's. It ended in a club, a spiked knob of bone, like a medieval weapon forged by time. If something got too close, a careless predator, a curious scavenger, that tail could shatter bone not out of rage, out of reflex, because Megafauna didn't fight for dominance. It fought only when it had to, and when it did, it was enough. It fed on plants, tough shrubs, fibrous leaves, low-hanging fruits. Its beak was sharp, its jaws powerful, and it needed little. It lived slow, moved slow, grew old. It was peace, shaped by resilience. And that's why it survived for millions of years. While empires of predators rose and fell, while climate shifted and oceans receded, Megafauna simply walked forward. No rush, no panic, only presence. It had no natural enemies, none that could match its armour or breach its tail. It knew no fear. And that, perhaps, was its downfall. Because Mealania was isolated far from continents, far from competition, it lived on islands where time moved differently, where evolution paused, where giants became small and the small forgot to run. So when humans arrived, with fire in their hands and hunger in their hearts, Mealania didn't react. It didn't hide. It didn't strike first. It watched. It waited. It trusted. And then it vanished. There was no battle, no epic last stand, just traps, dogs, fire, and the slow unravelling of something that had never needed to defend itself before. Its bones are scattered across ancient middens heaps of shell and ash where early settlers cooked their meals. Its tail clubs are found beside charcoal fire pits. Its skulls cracked open with stone tools. Not for war, for dinner, because in a world of survival even a tank can become a meal if it does not flee. And so, the last Mealania, the last of the great island turtles, was not killed by a rival beast, or swept away by a storm. It was killed by trust, killed by the idea that this new bipedal creature, this fire carrier, was just another part of the island. But we were not. We were the unseen extinction, the kind that doesn't roar, the kind that smiles as it sharpens its tools, the kind that steps ashore hungry and curious and never leaves. Mealania had no story in human memory. It left no cave art, no mythic legacy, no whispered legend. Just bones, buried under ash, tails still curled in defence, head still armoured, though it didn't matter in the end. And yet there's something sacred in those remains, something that calls to the quiet power of what once was, a creature that never sought to dominate, that didn't evolve for conquest, that simply was strong, silent, and enduring. Mealania is a reminder that not all extinction is deserved, that not all survival comes from aggression, that sometimes the purest life is the one that just wants to keep walking. It lived on islands where time forgot the world, and when the world returned, it didn't run. Today, the name Mealania means small aroma, but that's not what it was. It was the last of its kind, a giant among ghosts, a testament to a world before fire, before traps, before betrayal. Its armour was not its failure. Its strength was not a flaw. Its only mistake was believing the island was still its own. And now, when we look upon its fossil tail and its horned skull, we must not laugh. We must not shrug. We must remember, because every time we step onto a new shore, every time we claim another corner of earth, we bring more than ourselves. We bring extinction, draped in invention. We bring fire disguised as light. And we leave behind only bones and silence. Mealania didn't fail, we did. Megaloceros, the tree-antlered spirit of the ice. It didn't roar. It didn't charge like a rhino or slash like a saber-tooth. It did not hunt, and yet it left humans speechless. This was Megaloceros giganteus, the giant deer of the Ice Age, but to call it just a deer is to miss the point. This was a spirit wrapped in bone and grace, a symbol, not just a species, a creature too massive for silence, too elegant for brutality. Its body was powerful, strong legs built for migration, a chest wide with breath, muscle flowing beneath a coat of thick, warm fur. But that's not what people remembered, what they painted, what they worshipped. They remembered its antlers, wider than a car, wider than some trees, over 3.6 meters across, stretching like arms of the forest itself, twisting, branching, a crown of wilderness sculpted by nature's patience. Its antlers were not weapons, they were monuments, and when it stepped through the morning mist, those antlers glowed like relics of a forgotten god. It stood tall too, 1 meter at the shoulder and weighed nearly 700 kilograms. But still it moved like fog, with the silence of a creature that knew how to walk without disturbing the world. Megaloceros didn't conquer, it wandered. Across Eurasia from Ireland to Siberia, it followed the edge of the melting ice, migrating with the rhythm of seasons, feeding on soft grasses, herbs, bark. It didn't demand attention, it earned reverence, and our ancestors noticed. In the deep caves of Lascaux Chauvet and Altamira, beneath torchlight flickering on limestone walls, they drew Megaloceros, not as a meal, not as a conquest, but as something between animal and angel. They painted its antlers glowing like halos, its body graceful, not fallen, its eyes full of something more than instinct. This was not prey, this was presence. This was the forest incarnate. And though they surely hunted it for meat, for hide, for survival, they did not diminish it. They respected it. Because to kill a Megaloceros was not a victory, it was a ceremony. It lived in a world of giants, mammoths, woolly rhinos, cave bears, but none were painted like it, none were remembered like it. There's something sacred about that. Because Megaloceros stood on a line between what is real and what is myth. Its antlers weren't just tools of mating display. They were symbols of strength, of endurance, of a forest world too large to last. But even giants have enemies. As the Ice Age ended, the plains turned to forests, dense, tangled, shadowed. The great open spaces disappeared, and those magnificent antlers, once a symbol of majesty, became a burden. They snagged on branches, caught in vines, too wide for a shrinking world. And the climate changed. Grasslands vanished. Nutrient-rich plants became sparse, and with less food came weaker antlers, smaller frames, a dwindling lineage. But it wasn't just nature that closed the door. We were there, Homo sapiens. Smaller, clever, armed with fire and memory. We had traded spears for tactics, solitude for groups, we hunted in teams. We dug pit traps, learned to read tracks, and watched their paths like falling stars. And as we spread through the forests, we met Megaloceros again, only now it was cornered. No longer able to flee through endless plains, no longer able to lift its head above the trees, and slowly, without scream or scare, it disappeared, not all at once, not in a final battle. Just year after year, less hoofprints in the mud, fewer bones in the hills, more silence in the valleys, until finally the last antlers fell, and the forest had no more giants. What remains now are the cave paintings, the bones buried in peat bogs, the echoes in our minds when we dream of antlers in the snow, and a question we keep asking: why do we remember it? We do not sketch rats on cave walls, we do not carve idols of wild pigs, but Megaloceros? It's in our stories, in our imagination, in the part of us that still walks quietly beneath tall trees, hoping to glimpse something enormous, majestic, sacred. Because Megaloceros wasn't just a deer, it was a memory alive. A memory of what the earth once was, vast unbroken, filled with breathless silence and creatures too large for cages. It didn't fight for its place, it simply was, and that was enough, until it wasn't. Today, the word Megaloceros lives only in textbooks. Its antlers sit behind museum glass, spread wide but frozen. But the awe, the reverence, that lives on, in the hush of winter forests, in the drawings of ancient hands, in the eyes of a child staring at a creature too big to forget. Megaloceros was not a predator, not a warrior, not a king. It was something older, something rarer. It was the spirit of the wild painted not because we feared it, but because we felt something when it walked by. And when it vanished, it left us with more than silence. It left us with a lesson. That not everything sacred wears a crown. Sometimes It wears antlers like trees and walks slowly through the fog until the forest forgets how to hold it. Aurochs, the wild cow that would not bow. Before farms, before fences, before we called ourselves herders, ranchers, breeders, there was this, the aurochs. Not a cow, not livestock, not meat on hooves, but a shadow of thunder moving across the grasslands like something carved from the dark. It was not built for the barn, it was built for war. Standing nearly 2 meters tall at the shoulder, weighing over 1,000 kilograms, the aurochs was muscle and fury given form. Its horns, long and sharp, arched out like the crescent blades of ancient gods, not for show but for defiance. Its eyes were not dull, they were lit with challenge. And when it saw us, it didn't flinch. It charged. This was no gentle grazer. This was primigenius, the original, the primal beast from which all our modern cattle descend, though none have kept its spirit. You've seen cows, you've heard their lowing, felt their calm, forgotten their wild. But the aurochs was not something to forget. It moved in herds like war bands, dark-skinned, towering, snorting with breath that steamed in winter air. In the wild meadows of Europe, from Spain to Russia, across the riverlands of Mesopotamia, and deep into the forests of India, the aurochs ruled, not through conquest but through presence. It did not ask to be respected. It demanded it. And so we painted it. In the caves of Lascaux, Chauvet, Altamira and Bimbetka humans drew the aurochs in bold, trembling strokes, its horns exaggerated, its stance defiant, its eyes watching us even from stone. Not as food, not merely as prey, but as a force. Because to face the aurochs was not to fill your belly. It was to prove you could stand your ground against something older, stronger, and utterly unwilling to yield. Hunting one was no simple feat. Spears broke, bones snapped. Stories were born beside the fires of hunters gored of chases that lasted days, of victories that became legends. To bring down an aurochs wasn't survival. It was a rite of passage. And when its body fell, there was no celebration, only awe. Its meat fed families, its hide made cloaks, drums, tents. Its horns became tools, vessels and symbols. But its spirit that remained in the soil, in the trembling footprints, in the smoke that curled around its name. We did not tame it. We couldn't. Not at first. The aurochs resisted domestication for thousands of years. Our ancestors tried capturing calves, raising them, coaxing obedience. But generation after generation, the wildness returned. It would not bow. It would not wear a yoke. It would not walk gently beside the plough. Until finally, somewhere between 8,000 and 10,000 years ago, in the valleys of the Fertile Crescent, a shift occurred. We began to breed the smallest, the least aggressive, those that could be controlled. And slowly, painfully, the aurochs was reduced. Its children became something else. Cows, docile, milk-giving, obedient. They lost the fire in their eyes, their horns shrank, their bodies softened. And the aurochs as a species began to vanish. But not all at once. Even as cattle spread across the globe, wild aurochs still roamed the forests of Europe. In Poland, Germany, Hungary, they remained untamed, fierce and free. Kings set aside forests as royal hunting grounds, not for deer or boar but for aurochs. To kill one was still a test of manhood, a privilege reserved for nobility. But the world changed. Forests fell to axes, farms swallowed the wild, and diseases, spread by domesticated cattle, began to eat away at the last wild herds. By the 1600s there were barely a dozen left. In a Polish forest called Jaktro, a few survivors wandered the thinning trees. And then, one day in 1627, the last aurochs, a female, fell. Not in battle, not in a blaze of fury, but in loneliness, and with her, the wild cow, the one who refused to kneel, was gone. Extinct not because it failed, but because we would not let it live. Today, the aurochs exists only in fossils, in the carbon smears of cave walls, in the DNA of every domestic cow, a ghost, half-remembered, carrying horns it no longer wears. And yet some try to bring it back. Backbreeding projects from Spain to Germany have sought to recreate the aurochs from its gentler descendants. They crossbreed old cattle lines, selecting for height horn size temperament, hoping that maybe some piece of its wild heart still beats inside the cow. But what they create will not be the aurochs, because the aurochs was not just a body, it was a time, a challenge, a presence that did not yield, and what made it sacred, what made it unforgettable, was not its usefulness, it was its unwillingness to be used. We may one day breed cattle that look like aurochs. They may stand tall, their horns may curve like scythes, but unless they carry the fire, the refusal, the untamed soul, they are only echoes. What we lost wasn't just an animal, it was the test it gave us, the confrontation in the grass, the stare that asked, "Are you worthy of this land?" And in killing it, we may have answered too quickly. Today, when you pass a field of cows, think not of milk or meat. Think of the great shadow behind them, of the beast that walked like thunder and would not bow to fire or fence. The aurochs did not fail. It was not defeated. It was remembered on walls, in bloodlines, and deep in the part of us that still longs for something wild, something vast, something unbroken. Because once we shared the world with something that looked us in the eye and did not flinch. And maybe that's why we painted it with such trembling hands. Not because we feared it, but because we respected it. Woolly rhinoceros. The frosted ghost of the steppes. It did not roar. It did not charge with rage. It did not need to. The woolly rhinoceros, Quelodonta antiquitatis, walked across the frozen earth like a moving boulder shaped by ice, wind, and time. It was not designed for war. It was designed for endurance, where blizzards howled like wolves, where snow covered the ground 10 months a year, where the wind cut skin like knives. The woolly rhino thrived. Not survived, thrived. Over 4 meters long, nearly 2 tons in weight, its body was a snow-sculpted tank. It wore a coat of layered fur thick, long and oily, not just for warmth but for resistance. To water, wind, and time. Beneath the fur, a layer of fat, thicker than any modern animal. Beneath the fat, a skeleton of solid endurance bones, not meant for speed but for holding up the sky. And on its head, a horn, not decorative, not ceremonial. A curved blade of keratin, sometimes over 1 meter long, pointing forward like a snowplow, designed not to kill but to clear. Clear snow, clear ice, clear a path to survival. With that horn, the woolly rhino could carve through permafrost, uncovering frozen sedges, lichens, and prehistoric grass. Its nose, wide and low to the ground, was built like a snow shovel, shoving aside crusted frost, seeking the tender shoots hidden beneath. This was not an Ice Age monster. It was an Ice Age solution, and it worked. From the British Isles to Korea, from the Siberian tundra to the frozen steppes of Central Asia, the woolly rhinoceros was there, walking, grazing, enduring. It roamed alone, or in small families. It did not herd like mammoths. It did not hunt like saber-toothed cats. It simply moved slow and steady, like time made flesh. And for tens of thousands of years nothing could touch it. Cave bears kept their distance. Dire wolves watched and passed. Even humans, armed with fire, flint, and ambition, approached it with hesitation. Because to face a woolly rhino was to test your entire lineage. Yes, we hunted them. Evidence remains. Bones split by hand axes, spears embedded in fossilized ribs, scenes carved into cave walls. But unlike mammoths, they were never our first choice. Why? Because they were dangerous. One charge could break a rib cage. One swing of the head could crush a skull, and their skin, thick as tree bark, was no easy target. These weren't aggressive creatures. They didn't pursue. But when cornered, when threatened, when surrounded by hungry strangers with torches and stones, they became storms. Somewhere deep in our oldest memories, in the art, in the myths, in the silence passed down around firelight, we remembered them not as prey, but as spirits. In the caves of Chauvet you can still see them, drawn in charcoal by hands that trembled not with fear, but with awe. Broad-backed silhouettes, horns like lightning bolts, eyes like coals glowing in the frost. They were painted not falling, not fleeing, but standing solid, unmoved. Not everything that dies in our stories is defeated. Some vanish like mist. That is how the woolly rhino disappeared. There was no asteroid, no firestorm, no plague of arrows. There was just change. The cold began to loosen its grip. Glaciers retreated. Rivers swelled. Grasslands turned to bogs, to forest, to swamps. And with the warmth came unfamiliar plants. The woolly rhino, built for snow, could not graze on trees. Its food vanished. Its path narrowed. And the frost, its lifelong shield, became a memory. Some say we killed them. Some say the climate did. But maybe it was both. A slow starvation, combined with the final push the spear, the trap, the hunger in our eyes. The last known woolly rhino died around 10,000 years ago, its bones buried in frozen mud, a silent ending. No cry, no roar, just the absence of footsteps where once a mountain used to move. But we remember. In museums its skulls rest like relics, its horn, so iconic, vanished into time, for keratin decays faster than bone, but its shadow lives on. In stories, in art, in the part of us that still hears wind through dead grass, and wonders what's walking just out of sight. And every so often, from the melting tundras of Siberia, a body emerges, preserved in ice, flesh still intact, fur still red with iron-rich soil, eyes still closed as if asleep. A reminder that this world was once colder, quieter, and full of giants who made no war, claimed no throne, but still made the earth tremble. And though we live now in a warmer age beneath artificial light and buzzing cities, a part of us still remembers the rhythm of the cold. We remember the woolly rhino, not as a beast, not as a brute, but as a ghost of the frost, a creature too silent to be feared, too ancient to be ignored. It walked without asking for attention. It died without asking for mercy. But it was here, and it mattered. Because once the earth was ice, and in that ice walked something as old as the wind and as proud as the mountain. It left no songs, only footprints in frozen mud, only bones beneath melting glaciers, only dreams passed down through blood and breath. If you listen in the stillness, in the snow, in the hush before winter's first frost, you might still hear it. The woolly rhinoceros, not roaring, not crying, just walking, just surviving, until there was no more ice to carry it forward. Panthera leo fossilis, the first king without a roar, before the pride, before the savannah thundered with golden manes and echoing roars, before the lion became a symbol of empires and banners and mythic strength, there was another king, Panthera leo fossilis, the first lion, and perhaps the last to walk without noise. You won't find him in the dusty plains of Africa. You won't hear his voice in the Serengeti, because this lion was European, a ghost of the Pleistocene, a shadow in the woods, a sovereign of silence. It roamed across what we now call Germany, France, Spain, the Balkans, and into the vast steppes of Eurasia, long before Rome, long before written memory. This was Europe's original predator king, older than the mammoth, older than the human word lion. And it didn't need to roar. It didn't need a sound to declare dominion. It moved like smoke through pine forests, through glacier-fed valleys, through highland meadows powdered with snow. No fanfare, no chorus, just presence. Panthera leo fossilis was a giant, nearly 1.5 meters tall at the shoulder, stretching over 3.5 meters in length, with a massive skull, thick-boned and heavy-jawed. This was not the lion you see today. It was bigger, bulkier and quieter. Its teeth weren't just for killing, they were for dismembering the Ice Age. Its paws, broad, padded, silent, could cross frozen streams without leaving a sound. Its claws, retractable knives, left no warning. Its eyes, twin orbs of gold or grey, saw through the dark. There were no prides, no lazy basking under the sun, no roaring to mark territory. Panthera leo fossilis was solitary, a phantom cat that hunted alone the way glaciers moved, patiently without waste, without doubt. It had no time for dominance displays. It didn't need to intimidate rivals with noise. It let its kills speak, and those kills were legendary. This lion brought down giant deer, juvenile mammoths, wild aurochs, woolly horses and steppe bison, not through the chase, but through ambush. It stalked along tree lines and rocky ledges. It studied herds from ridges with unblinking eyes, and when the moment was right, it struck fast, precise, fatal. One pounce, a crushing bite to the neck, a moment of silence. The meal wasn't shared. There were no calls to family, only blood on snow and the deep, slow breath of something that ruled through restraint. We think of lions as roaring monarchs, as the king of beasts. But Panthera leo fossilis didn't need the crown. It wore its solitude like armour. It reigned through absence, through the silence it left behind after the kill. Even the early humans who lived alongside it, Homo heidelbergensis and later Neanderthals, rarely tried to face it. It wasn't just fear, it was respect, and perhaps something deeper, an understanding that some creatures are better unprovoked. In the darkest parts of the Chauvet caves, our ancestors painted it. Not snarling, not rearing, but watching, waiting. A silhouette of tension and balance, the muscles caught mid-step, the eyes forever aware. One drawing, thousands of years old, shows a group of lions, likely Panthera leo, fossilis not hunting but observing. It was as if the artist knew this lion was different. Not a brute, not a beast, but a being with intellect, with deliberation, with an unspoken code. And then something changed. As the Ice Age began to shift, and warmer climates crept north, Panthera leo fossilis began to fade. Its home, the cool woodlands and wide steppes, grew patchy, unstable. Its prey thinned out, either migrating or vanishing altogether. New predators emerged, new rivals. Humans, more numerous now, more organised, armed with fire, stone and strategy, began to challenge the lion, and the silence began to fray. Over time, Panthera leo fossilis gave way to something new. Panthera leo spelaea, the cave lion, its slightly smaller descendant, more social, slightly louder, more adaptable. The king of quiet passed its throne to the king of echoes. And though the cave lion roared and though it hunted in groups, it was never quite the same. Because the first lion, the oldest lion, the lion without a roar, had vanished. And yet, not completely. Its bones remain in tar pits, in caves beneath the dust of forgotten valleys. Skulls larger than any modern lion, teeth still sharp enough to tear silence in half. And in today's Panthera leo, the African lion, you can still see its shadow. The shoulders, the gaze, the dignity, but not the quiet. We gave lions their roar, we celebrated their noise, but we lost something sacred in the exchange. We lost the lion that didn't need to be heard. There is something noble in power that does not brag, in danger that does not announce itself, in mastery that walks on padded feet and leaves only paw prints and awe. Panthera leofossilis was such a being. It killed without cruelty, lived without waste, faded without tragedy. Its extinction was not marked by war or flames. There was no great battle, only a soft vanishing, a slow exhale, final glance over the shoulder, and a long walk into the forgotten forests of time. But if you ever find yourself in the ancient woods of Europe, beneath the hush of snow on a winter night when even the birds are quiet stop, listen. There is no roar, but perhaps in the stillness, in the darkness, you'll feel something watching, something older than your language, something larger than your fear, and for just a second you'll remember the first king, not because he conquered, but because he never needed to, Paleoloxodon antiquus, the elephant of forest temples, before war elephants. Before temples were carved in stone, before stories were written down, there was a giant that walked the forest floor like a living shrine. Its name was Paleoloxodon antiquus, an ancient elephant of Europe, and perhaps the largest land mammal to ever walk the earth. It didn't trumpet its power. It didn't crash through the trees. It moved slowly with the weight of mountains and the grace of rivers. It stood nearly 4 meters tall at the shoulder, weighed over 13 tons, with tusks that could stretch more than 4 meters forward, curving like ivory bows of forgotten gods. And it didn't live in deserts, not on the savannah. It ruled the deep green forests of southern Europe, from the oak groves of Spain to the misty hills of the Caucasus. A colossus among trees, a god among mammals, and a presence that Homo heidelbergensis, our distant ancestor, may have revered. This wasn't an elephant that humans domesticated. It wasn't herded or yoked or dragged into battle. Paleoloxodon antiquus was too large, too powerful, too untouchable. Its bones, when found today, are often found alone, no hunting tools nearby, no signs of violence. Instead, around some fossilized skeletons, archaeologists have found stone tools arranged with strange intention, ash circles, carefully packed earth patterns that feel less like butchery and more like ritual. Did they bury it? Did they honor it? Did they see it not as food, but as a being, a spirit wrapped in muscle and time? We don't know, but something about this creature made early humans stop. It wasn't just its size, it was the way it existed. Paleoloxodon antiquus wasn't like the mammoth. It didn't battle the blizzards of the north. It lived in warmth, in the hush of green shadows, where sunlight filtered through leaves like stained glass. Its diet was simple soft branches, tender leaves, ripe fruit. It had no predators. Not really, because what predator dares challenge a walking mountain? And yet, it wasn't aggressive. It didn't conquer the forest. It walked through it, part of it as ancient as the trees, as patient as the moss beneath its feet. Its skull was massive, domed, ridged, shaped like a helmet forged by the earth itself. Some believe that ancient stories of one-eyed giants, cyclopes, may have begun with fossilized skulls of Paleoloxodon, because in the center of its forehead, where the nasal cavity once held the trunk, a great hole remained. To early humans who found those skulls long after the elephants were gone, it must have looked like the eye socket of a god, but when it lived, it needed no myth. It was real, and it was everywhere. From Germany to Sicily, from Britain's southern coast to the warm edges of Anatolia, Paleoloxodon antiquus roamed, a bridge between continents and ages. Its footsteps carved pathways, its presence shaped ecosystems. And as humans spread through Europe, they lived beside it, sometimes hunting the young, sometimes scavenging the old. But mostly, they watched, and maybe they learned. Because in the bones of this elephant there is something more than biology. There is story. In one dig site in Germany, a nearly complete skeleton was found, surrounded by 600 stone tools. Too many for one kill, too many to explain by accident. Were they offerings? Were they remembrances? Was this elephant not hunted but mourned? It's not proof, it's not fact. But it's a feeling that clings to the fossils, the sense that this wasn't just prey, it was something more. And when the forests began to change, so too did the fate of this gentle titan. The climate shifted. Glacial periods pushed south. Woodlands became cold, open plains. New rivals arrived. Smaller, more social, more aggressive elephants like the mammoth began to dominate the shifting landscape. And humans, we grew smarter, sharper, hungrier. As our spears grew longer and our groups grew larger, even the forest kings found fewer places to stand in peace. One by one, the Paleoloxodon disappeared. There was no cataclysm, no volcanic fire, no instant collapse. Just a quiet reduction, one fewer birth, one more death. And finally, nothing. The last of them walked into the forest and never came out again. But their bones remain, in caves, in clay, in the riverbeds of memory. And perhaps most haunting of all, their tusks, curved and heavy, not like tools, but like symbols. Carvings have been found on some, scratches, etchings. Did early humans leave their mark? Or were they trying to speak back to the creature they could no longer follow? We may never know, but in those ivory spirals there is a silence that still echoes. Paleoloxodon antiquus was more than a beast. It was a temple with legs of forest memory given breath. It walked without fear, it died without anger, and it left behind not only bones but perhaps something even more rare: reverence. Today, the elephants we know are symbols of strength, memory, and majesty. But maybe that didn't start with us. Maybe we learned it from them, from the way they stood, the way they walked, the way they died. So, if you ever find yourself beneath the canopy of an ancient European forest, if the trees seem taller than they should, and the ground feels too quiet, pause. Listen to the wind, and you might feel it, a shape in the memory of the woods, a presence larger than thought, a silence that once walked among us, not as a monster, not as prey, but as something we once followed, not with weapons, but with wonder,